In April of 1841, Silas Rutledge made an announcement so shocking that even the most brutal plantation owners in South Carolina recoiled. He declared that his only daughter, Catherine, a 28-year-old woman weighing over 260 pounds, would be placed under the complete control of one of his enslaved men, Ezekiel Cross. Not as a caretaker. Not as a companion. But as her master in every way that mattered, except on paper. The elite of Colleton County were scandalized. To them, it was a disgrace beyond comprehension. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was why Silas had done it, or what Ezekiel Cross would soon do to Catherine. By November, her body had changed in ways that defied explanation. 13 men were dead. And Cypress Grove Plantation was reduced to smoldering ruins. So what really happened between an enslaved man and the plantation owner's daughter? What did Ezekiel do that left survivors too terrified to speak? Before I reveal the disturbing truth, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and comment your state below. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Spring in Colleton County pressed down like a suffocating weight. The air clung to the skin, hot and wet, as though the very atmosphere refused to move. The Coom River slid sluggishly through the low country, its black surface broken only by the drooping veils of Spanish moss hanging from ancient oaks, like mourning cloth left for the dead. For miles, rice paddies shimmered under the sun, flooded fields where enslaved men, women, and children waited knee-deep from dawn until dusk. Every stalk of rice was wealth stolen from misery, prosperity pulled from human suffering, and all of it wrapped in the lies of men who called their cruelty the natural order. Cypress Grove Plantation stretched across 800 acres. Moderately fertile, moderately productive, enough to keep its master, Silas Rutledge, wealthy by most standards. He owned 58 enslaved people. Enough to be rich, but not enough to be powerful. In Colleton County, true influence belonged to families with thousands of acres and hundreds of enslaved lives at their disposal, families who summered in Charleston, sent their children to northern universities, and whose very names could secure fortunes or ruin reputations. Silas longed to join their ranks. He had married Elizabeth Yancey in 1812, a match that gave him modest land and a respected surname. Elizabeth was shrewd, meticulous, and far more concerned with profits than social status. But she died in 1813, giving birth to their only child, Catherine. For nearly 3 decades, Silas raised her alone, channeling the rest of his energy into clawing his way into the county's inner circle. Tall and thin, with prematurely gray hair and a temperament as cold as his appearance, Silas was known as a hard but honest businessman. A man who kept his word, though he drove bargains to the bone. Catherine, meanwhile, grew up isolated, taught by tutors, never fitting into the world around her. By 1841, she was 28 years old, her body swollen from years of treatments prescribed by doctors who branded her with vague diagnoses like hysteria and female nervous disorder. She suffered violent fits, screaming, throwing objects, once even slashing her father's hand with a letter opener. The county whispered about her with mock pity, poor Silas Rutledge, cursed with a mad daughter. Such a shame, she'd been so pretty as a child. But the truth was far darker. Catherine was not insane. What she carried inside her came from something she had witnessed at 12 years old, something no one in polite society could ever understand. On April 7th, a letter arrived by private courier. Silas opened it in his study, expecting business papers. Instead, he found 3 pages on fine stationery, sealed with red wax. The seal was unmistakable, a scythe crossed with wheat stalks. The mark of the brethren of the harvest. 13 men. Men who gathered in darkness, blending ancient European rituals with beliefs stolen from the enslaved, men who believed power came through blood sacrifice. That the strong must consume the weak. Literally, when necessary. Silas had joined them in 1822. Nearly 2 decades later, he had taken part in perhaps 40 ceremonies, rituals that ranged from unsettling to unspeakable. And now the brethren had come to collect. He owed them $12,000. Gambling debts. Failed investments. Money he could never repay without selling nearly all his land and every enslaved person he owned. Ruin. Unless, of course, he accepted their alternative. The letter's command was chilling: place his daughter Catherine under the complete control of one of his enslaved men for 1 year. Not as punishment. Not as treatment. As a full and total transfer of authority. The man would have ownership over her daily life, her body, her treatment, everything. Silas was to announce it publicly, disguising it as a radical medical measure. The humiliation would be absolute. But if he agreed, his debt would vanish. His position restored. His place in society protected. Silas sat in his study for hours, staring into the candlelight. He knew the brethren's reach extended to every judge, every lawyer, every politician in the county. Refusing them meant destruction. Accepting meant sacrificing his daughter's dignity to save himself. A choice his society had already trained him to make: property over people, power over morality. Before dawn, Silas penned his acceptance. 3 days later, another letter arrived with the name of the man chosen: Ezekiel Cross. Age, 33. Skilled carpenter. Knowledge of herbal medicine. Quiet. Obedient. Purchased recently from Virginia. What the letter didn't say was that Ezekiel had been chosen deliberately. His presence at Cypress Grove was no accident. He carried with him not just skill, but something else, something that burned far deeper. A need for justice. And the patience to wait until the moment was right. On April 13th, a wagon pulled into the yard of the main house. Unlike most slave transactions, this one wasn't hidden near the barns. Silas stepped out onto the porch as the morning sun climbed. In the wagon sat Ezekiel. The first thing Silas noticed was his eyes. Most enslaved men kept their gaze downcast, a survival instinct beaten into them. But Ezekiel looked straight at him, calm, steady, unreadable. And that simple act unsettled Silas more than he cared to admit. Tall, broad-shouldered, built from years of labor. His hands calloused yet precise. His clothes plain but clean. His skin unmarked by whips. Ezekiel Cross radiated a quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. The trader, Henderson, climbed down and handed Silas the papers. Ezekiel Cross, as requested. Quiet, capable. Selected with care. Silas barely glanced at the parchment. His eyes remained fixed on the man in the wagon. "You understand why you are here?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Ezekiel replied, voice low and steady, touched with a Virginia drawl. "My daughter is unwell. You will be responsible for her. Doctors have failed her. They say you know herbs." "My grandmother was a healer," Ezekiel said simply. "She taught me before I was sold." The transaction was over in moments. Ezekiel was led to a small cabin near the main house, set apart from the quarters of the others. And so began the most scandalous, and most terrifying, arrangement Colleton County had ever seen. He was given only the most basic supplies and told his duties would begin in earnest the following morning. His instructions were clear, almost ritualistic in their delivery. His single and absolute responsibility was Catherine's care, and any failure on his part would bring swift and unforgiving punishment. Ezekiel nodded when expected, answering only with a calm "Yes, sir," before being dismissed. At last, he was left alone in the small cabin. For the first time since his arrival, Ezekiel allowed the mask to slip. His jaw unclenched, his shoulders lowered, the rigid posture of submission melting away into something closer to his true self. Sitting on the bed, he reached beneath his shirt and pulled out a small, tightly wrapped cloth bundle. With deliberate care, he unfolded it, revealing a worn and creased scrap of paper. On its surface, in a child's uneven handwriting, 3 names stood out: Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. His wife. His son. His daughter. They had been sold away from him 3 years earlier, torn from his arms like livestock, shipped to a notorious Alabama plantation that devoured human lives. Within 18 months they were all gone. Sarah, dead from fever, left untreated. Benjamin, a boy of only 10, dying from a festering wound that turned septic. And little Ruth, only 6 years old, who simply stopped eating, stopped speaking, and withered away from grief she could not put into words. And the man responsible for their deaths was none other than Silas Rutledge. He had not sold them for money. He had not sold them for necessity. He had sold them to impress the brethren, to prove that he could make the hard choices without hesitation or compassion. To demonstrate to his peers that sentiment held no sway over him, he had destroyed Ezekiel's family like kindling tossed into a fire. For 2 long years, Ezekiel had worked his way south, deliberately ensuring he was sold from one plantation to the next. Each step brought him closer. Each transfer gave him opportunities to listen, to learn, to collect whispers about the brethren of the harvest, their rituals, their hidden meetings, their names. He learned they believed themselves untouchable, men above consequence, who cloaked their savagery in ritual and their greed in secrecy. When at last the chance came to be sold to Rutledge himself, Ezekiel seized it. This was his opening. His chance not only to step inside Rutledge's house, but to pry open the man's secrets, to uncover his vulnerabilities, and to deliver justice, not through courts, which would never serve him, but through patience, through planning, and through the willingness to become as monstrous as those he meant to destroy. He folded the paper again, pressed it to his chest for a long moment, then tucked it back into his shirt. Stretching out on the bed, he stared at the low ceiling and began planning. Every detail mattered. Every move had to be perfect. His first day began on April 14th. A house servant named Judith, a middle-aged woman with streaks of gray in her tightly bound hair, escorted him to Catherine's chambers on the 2nd floor. She knocked gently, hesitation in every movement. "Miss Catherine," Judith called softly, "your father has brought someone to help with your treatments." A loud crash erupted from inside, the sound of something heavy striking the wall. Then a woman's voice, sharp and venomous despite its slurred edges. "I do not want more treatments. Send him away." Judith winced, glancing at Ezekiel with weary sympathy. "She has bad days," she whispered. "This is one." Without a word, Ezekiel opened the door and stepped inside, shutting it behind him before Judith could follow. The room was large, but suffocatingly dark. Heavy curtains sealed out the daylight, leaving the air stale and heavy. The sharp, metallic sweet odor of mercury lingered, mixing with the stench of unwashed bedding. Books lay scattered across the floor, a picture frame lay shattered against the wall, clothes lay in heaps as if thrown in anger. Catherine sat slumped in a chair near the cold fireplace, draped in a stained dressing gown. Her dark hair hung loose, matted and tangled. Her face was swollen, her eyes glazed, her hands trembling on the chair's arms. She looked at him, first confused, then afraid, then finally angry. "Who are you?" "I said no more doctors." "I am not a doctor, miss," Ezekiel said steadily. "My name is Ezekiel. Your father asked me to help you." "Help," she spat, followed by a harsh, broken laugh. "That is what they all say. Help. Treatment. Medicine. They mean poison. They mean chains. They mean silence." She lurched to her feet, swaying with weakness, but her voice sharpened with sudden fury. "I know what this is. He is punishing me again, for remembering. For speaking. For refusing to forget." Ezekiel remained still, calm, his posture unthreatening. "What are you supposed to forget?" The question caught her off guard. For a moment, her anger faltered, replaced by something vulnerable. "You do not know." "I know nothing, miss," he replied softly. "Only that your father says you are unwell." Catherine studied him then, as if seeing him for the first time. "You are not from here." "Virginia originally, miss." Her voice dropped, edged with suspicion. "Do you know what happens in this house? What they do in the cellar?" Ezekiel's heartbeat quickened, but he kept his face unreadable. "I do not know what you mean." "Liar." But there was no fire in it, only exhaustion. "Everyone lies. It is easier than truth." She dropped back into her chair. "Leave me." Tell my father his newest torment has failed." Instead, Ezekiel crossed to the window and pulled the curtains open. Sunlight poured in, flooding the dark room. Catherine shrieked and covered her eyes. "When did you last go outside, miss?" he asked. "I cannot walk that far. I am too weak." "When did you last eat without laudanum in your veins?" "The medicine is necessary. The doctors say so." "What if the doctors are wrong?" Her hands dropped slowly from her face. She stared at him, hope and terror battling in her gaze. "What did you say?" Ezekiel turned from the window, his voice steady but deliberate. This was the first card played. "I said, what if the doctors are wrong? What if everything you've been told about your sickness was never meant to heal you, but to keep you powerless? What if your father has been poisoning you for years, to ensure you could never speak about what you saw?" Silence. Absolute silence. Catherine froze, her trembling hands suddenly still. For half a minute she sat unmoving, her thoughts racing. When she spoke again, her voice was clearer, stripped of slur. "He told you." "Your father told me nothing, miss. But I have eyes. I know mercury poisoning. I know laudanum dependence. Healthy women do not waste away like this unless someone makes certain they do. Why would you say this?" Suspicion crept back into her eyes. "This is a trick. You are testing me. I am telling you the truth. I can help you, make you well again. Clear-minded. Strong enough to leave this room on your own feet. But it will not be easy. Years of medicine will fight you. Stopping will be agony. And your father will not approve." "Then why?" she demanded. "Why would you do this for me?" Ezekiel held her gaze, unflinching. "Because I have my own reasons for wanting Silas Rutledge to suffer. And the surest way to hurt him is to give him back a daughter sane enough to remember everything, and strong enough to speak it aloud." Catherine went still. She was broken, yes, but not foolish. Lies she could smell, manipulation she had endured all her life. But truth, raw and dangerous, she could recognize. "You want revenge on my father?" "Yes, miss." "What did he do to you?" "He sold my family," Ezekiel said. "My wife and 2 children. Sold them to their deaths, only to prove to his brethren that cruelty ruled him, not compassion." Her eyes widened, then narrowed with recognition. "The brethren. He sold them for the brethren." "The brethren, miss?" Ezekiel asked carefully. She laughed, the sound sharp, almost manic. "You will learn. Everyone learns eventually." She leaned forward, voice low, burning with venom. "If I agree, if I let you help me, what happens then?" "You get well, miss. And when you are well, we decide what comes next. You have your vengeance to claim. I have mine. Perhaps they align." Catherine's stare bored into him, unblinking. Finally, she spoke. "I want them all dead. My father. Judge Pelham. Reverend Crenshaw. Every man who stood in that cellar. I want them to suffer first, to know what is coming, to beg for their lives. Then I want them dead." Her words carried no madness, only fury sharpened by years of silence. Ezekiel inclined his head. "Then we understand one another, Miss Catherine. If we are conspirators," she pressed, "use my name." "I cannot, miss. Not where anyone might hear. We must be careful." Catherine's eyes gleamed with dangerous light. "Then hear me, Ezekiel, I have killed before. 3 slaves in this house, ones who might have told my father when my mind was clear. I cannot recall the details, the laudanum fogs everything. But I know I did it. They vanished, and their families were told they ran away." She smiled then, a terrible, brittle smile. "So if you plan to betray me, to use me and discard me, know this, I am not a victim. I am something worse." A chill passed through Ezekiel. He had sought an ally, instead, he found a woman whose violence might rival his own. But he kept his voice steady. "I believe you, miss. and I will not betray you." "Good." She stood, steadier than before. "Then let us begin. But I have one condition. When this is done, when revenge is ours, I want to die. I cannot live with what I have seen, with what I have done. You will help me with that too." Ezekiel hesitated, then nodded. "Agreed." Her hand extended. After a pause, Ezekiel took it. Her grip surprised him, strong, unyielding. Over the next week, the work began. Ezekiel slowly reduced her laudanum doses, replacing them with herbal tinctures, valerian for sleep and calm, chamomile for the stomach, milk thistle to cleanse her liver. The withdrawal was brutal. Catherine spent 3 days writhing in fever, vomiting until she was too weak to stand. Ezekiel never left her side. He held the basin, wiped her face with cool cloths, and spoke in low tones to remind her that she was not alone. When at last the worst passed, Catherine emerged frail but clearer. The tremors lessened. Her words sharpened. She could read again without losing her place. When at last the worst passed, Catherine emerged frail but clearer. The tremors lessened. Her words sharpened. She could read again without losing her place. Then the true rebuilding began. Ezekiel forced her to walk, first to the door and back, then down the hall, then further each day. He replaced her indulgent meals with strict portions of lean meats and vegetables, though she fought him, addicted to comfort food after years of despair. And while her body slowly mended, her voice began to unburden. She spoke to him of the cellar. She told him, at last, what she had seen when she was 12. She described it in a way that made Ezekiel's stomach churn, her words dragging images into the room that felt thick and suffocating, but he listened without interruption. She spoke of the years after, years of gaslighting, of her father convincing everyone, including her, that she was unwell, that her mind invented memories, that she could not be trusted even with her own thoughts. Every outburst, every scream, every trembling fit, explained away his madness. Catherine revealed she had kept a journal, carefully hidden, its pages filled with dates and times of her father's absences, names of visitors arriving at unnatural hours, and the strange sounds that drifted up from the cellar, sounds that should not exist in any ordinary home. Ezekiel, in turn, told her about his own family. He spoke of Sarah, his wife, who sang while working and taught their children to read in whispers despite the danger if discovered. He told her of Benjamin, his son, who at just 8 years old could calculate sums that astonished overseers. And Ruth, his youngest, who adored flowers and would gather wild blooms from the edges of fields, arranging them to bring color into the dimness of their cabin. He described how Silas Rutledge himself had come to that Virginia plantation, buyers warrant in hand. How he examined them like livestock, checking teeth, limbs, and posture, before agreeing to purchase all 3, Sarah and the children, for a reasonable price. And then, at the very last moment, Silas changed the terms. No, he said. He would take the woman and the children, but not Ezekiel. There was no reason for the split. No financial calculation that justified it. He did it because he could. Because cruelty itself was a form of currency among men like him. Ezekiel's voice dropped low, quiet but burning. That is what I remember most. My son's arms locked around my leg, begging me not to let go. My wife trying to be strong, whispering to Benjamin to be brave. And your father, smiling. Smiling like it pleased him to carve us apart. Catherine listened in silence, her eyes no longer clouded with laudanum, but sharpened by clarity. I am sorry, she said at last. I know the word is nothing, just air. But I am sorry you suffered because of what my father is. You are not responsible for what he does, Miss, Ezekiel answered. No, she said slowly, her voice steadier than he had heard before. But I am responsible for what I choose now. And I promise you, Ezekiel, he will pay for what he did. They all will pay. The formal announcement came on April 29th. 41 guests gathered in the grand dining hall of Cypress Grove, invited under the pretense of an important family matter. The county's elite filed in, their carriages lined along the drive. Judge Pelham arrived with his sharp-eyed wife, Eleanor. Reverend Crenshaw with his pale, watchful daughter. Marcus Fanning and his brood. Banker Benjamin Lyle. The air itself seemed to grow heavier as the meal began. The feast was extravagant: oysters fresh from the coast, duck roasted crisp, rice dishes laden with spices, sweet potatoes glazed, loaves of warm bread, and finally a towering cake iced with perfection. Through it all, Catherine sat at her father's right hand, eating sparingly, her demeanor calm, controlled, the very picture of recovery. She spoke only when spoken to, her face betraying nothing. Ezekiel served quietly alongside the other house servants. He moved unnoticed from table to table, filling glasses, clearing plates, his ears open to every conversation, his eyes memorizing every flicker of expression. Invisible but present in every moment. When the cake was finished and the wine glasses half drained, Silas stood and tapped his glass. Conversation ceased. All eyes turned toward him. "My friends," he began smoothly, "thank you for coming tonight. You know my daughter Catherine has suffered long. We tried physicians from Charleston, even specialists from Philadelphia. None succeeded. Until now." He gestured toward Ezekiel. "2 weeks ago, I entrusted Catherine's care to this man, Ezekiel. He has knowledge of herbal medicine, and as you see, Catherine is vastly improved. Clearer, calmer, more herself than in many years." Murmurs passed around the table, polite but cautious. Catherine remained composed, though Ezekiel, watching closely, saw her knuckles white as they tightened around her napkin. "This improvement," Silas continued, "brings me to a decision. Catherine's care must continue without interruption, more intensively than our household staff can manage. Thus, effective immediately, Ezekiel will have full responsibility for her welfare. He will oversee her treatment, daily routines, her very living arrangements. He will have complete authority." The murmurs sharpened. Confusion. Shock. Judge Peelham's wife gasped softly. Marcus Fanning frowned, his voice sharp as he addressed Silas. "Surely I misheard. You would place your daughter under the permanent authority of a slave?" "I place her," Silas said coldly, "under the care of the one who succeeded where your doctors failed. My daughter's health outweighs convention." Reverend Crenshaw interjected delicately. "But there are other possibilities. A nurse. A companion. A more suitable caretaker." Silas's face hardened. "My decision is final. Catherine agrees." He turned. "Do you not, daughter?" Every eye fixed on her. This was the moment, the chance to unravel the charade, to burn it all down. But Catherine's voice was steady, practiced. "I trust my father's judgment. Ezekiel has been kind. His treatments help. I am content. Perfect. Controlled." Yet Ezekiel saw what no one else did, the tiny tremor in her hand, the fury behind her eyes, the silent promise of fire. The evening ended in strained politeness. Guests departed sooner than expected, some murmuring behind fans, others pulling Silas aside in quiet consultation. Ezekiel caught snatches of whispers near the study door. "Is this wise? What will people say? The brethren will not tolerate this in the open." That last from Judge Peelham. Silas's reply was too quiet to hear, but Peelham's nod said enough. By midnight, the house was emptied of visitors. Catherine retired to her chamber. Silas locked himself in his study. Ezekiel finished cleanup, then slipped upstairs and knocked on Catherine's door. "Come in," she said. She sat by the window, still dressed from dinner, staring out into the moonlit grounds. She didn't turn as he entered. "So it is done. I am yours now. Property of property. What a farce." "How do you feel, miss?" Ezekiel asked. "I want to burn this house with every soul inside. But you've taught me patience. We wait." "Yes, miss. I agreed tonight because I want them calm, secure. I want them to dismiss me as pathetic, as they always have. Let them grow blind while we prepare." She turned to him then, her eyes bright with something fierce. "Did you see their faces? The disgust, the pity. They have no idea what is coming. She crossed to her dresser and pulled out a wooden box. Inside lay pages of cramped handwriting. I have kept this for years. Dates. Names. Rituals. It looks like nonsense at a glance, but I can decode every word. Enough to damn 20 men. And will they believe it, miss? Ezekiel asked softly. The testimony of a woman they called mad, and of a slave? No, Catherine admitted. Which is why we must find what they cannot deny. Proof. She held up one page, her finger tapping it. The ledger. They keep a record of everything, the rituals, the sacrifices, the names. Every man bound by the same guilt. My father let it slip once before he knew I was listening. It is in the cellar. A hidden chamber beyond the main hall. That is where it lies. Ezekiel's chest tightened. Such a book would be salvation and damnation both. And how do we reach it? My father travels to Charleston once each month. When he does, the house is quieter. That is when we go below. Ezekiel stood silent, weighing her words. The risk was monumental. The cellar was forbidden ground, watched even in daylight. Yet Catherine's gaze burned with conviction. We cannot wait forever, she pressed. Each gathering, they grow bolder. The ledger will show what they are, what they've done. If we have it, the city cannot turn away. And if we fail? Ezekiel asked. Then we die, and perhaps the fire takes us. But if we succeed, she leaned closer, voice a whisper meant only for him. We shatter them. Their brotherhood. Their masks. The truth will bleed through Charleston, through Philadelphia, through every town they slither into. I will not rest until it does. For a moment, the silence of the room held them both, heavy with the enormity of her vow. Beyond the window, the trees stirred under a restless wind, the moon half hidden in a drifting veil of cloud. Then we plan, Ezekiel said finally. Catherine's hand lingered over the wooden box, caressing it as though it were a talisman. The ledger is the heart. But there are other things in the cellar, relics, vessels, tokens of their covenant. We may need them too, if we are to prove the depth of their corruption. Ezekiel's mind turned to practical matters. Guards. Locks. Torches. The creak of old hinges. Every detail would matter. You must show me the passages, miss. Where they gather. Where they hide it. I will. Her smile was sharp, almost cruel. I know this house better than any of them realize. When they shut me away, I listened. I watched. Madness gave me patience, and patience gave me sight. Ezekiel bowed his head slightly, acknowledging her hidden strength. But unease gnawed at him. He had seen what men like Silas did when their secrets were threatened. Punishment would not be swift, it would be ruinous. At that moment, a knock sounded at the chamber door. Catherine stiffened, shoving the box back into the dresser and slipping the key into her sleeve. Ezekiel moved to the shadows as the latch turned. It was Silas. His figure loomed in the doorway, his face a mask of paternal concern, but his eyes sharp, probing. You are still awake, daughter? I could not sleep, Catherine said evenly, folding her hands in her lap. The evening left me restless. Silas stepped inside, his gaze flicking toward the corners of the room. Ezekiel held still, cloaked by shadow. You must rest, Silas murmured. Strength will be demanded of you in days to come. He touched her shoulder lightly, his voice low. The brethren are unsettled. Some whisper rebellion against my choice tonight. But they will fall in line. They always do. Catherine's expression never faltered. I trust you, Father. Silas smiled faintly, though suspicion lingered in his eyes. He lingered another moment, then turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Only then did Catherine exhale. Her hands trembled as she pressed them together. They doubt him already, she whispered. That is good. Division weakens them. And when we strike, the blow will cut twice as deep. Ezekiel stepped from the shadows, his jaw tight. "Miss, if he suspects, he will move the ledger." "Then we must be faster," Catherine replied, her voice steady once more. "The next gathering is in 3 nights. That is when they descend into the cellar. That is when we watch, unseen. And after that, we act." Her eyes gleamed in the dim light, fierce and unyielding. "Let them think me cured, docile, obedient. Let them think you invisible. They will not see the knife until it is at their throat." For days after Catherine's departure, Cypress Grove settled into an uncanny calm. The servants whispered less, moving with a stiffness that betrayed their unease. Ezekiel resumed his duties, outwardly compliant, inwardly measuring every breath, every corridor, every flicker of expression among the brethren who lingered too long on the property. His chains had not been removed, only gilded with the false promise of belonging. Silas summoned him often, sometimes to test herbs in the stillroom, sometimes to sit in silence by the fire as if his mere presence might betray loyalty or rebellion. The master's eyes, always sharp, seemed to bore through Ezekiel's every thought. And yet, Silas smiled more now, as though the arrangement pleased him. One evening, Silas placed a sealed letter on the table. "News from Philadelphia. Your Catherine is well. She has been received by my associates, under a new name. She is safe." Ezekiel's hands itched to tear open the letter, but he did not move. "May I see her handwriting, master?" Silas's smile thinned. "No. It is not her words but theirs. She will not be allowed to contact you. That was the agreement." Ezekiel bowed, but inside, rage smoldered. He knew the truth of men like Silas, every promise wrapped in lies, every bargain poisoned. Catherine might be safe, or she might be buried already in some unmarked northern grave. He could not know. Not yet. The nights stretched long. Ezekiel lay awake in the cabin, replaying Catherine's final glance, the fire in her eyes. "Trust me," she had begged without words. He repeated it like prayer. 3 weeks came quickly. The brethren gathered again in the cellar, robes sweeping stone, the circle closing with grim anticipation. Ezekiel was led to the center, stripped to his shirt, his hands bound loosely, not to restrain, but to humiliate. The altar gleamed under candlelight, crimson cloth darker now, as if stained with something older than wax. Silas's voice rang in the vaulted chamber. "Tonight we welcome an initiate. Not as brother, but as witness, as tool, as instrument. He joins us not by blood, but by choice. Ezekiel, son of no name, once slave of Cypress Grove, do you accept your place?" "I accept," Ezekiel said, his voice steady. Reverend Crenshaw stepped forward with a vessel of wine, thick and black in the candlelight. He pressed it into Ezekiel's hands. "Drink, and you bind yourself to us. Refuse, and your body feeds the swamp tonight." Ezekiel raised the cup. The liquid smelled of iron, bitter and metallic. He drank. A murmur rippled through the brethren, approval mixed with unease. Some sneered at the sight, others watched with morbid curiosity. Judge Pelham leaned forward in his chair. "Let him prove himself, Silas. A word is wind. A deed binds tighter." Silas nodded slowly. "So be it." He gestured, and 2 men dragged forward a struggling figure. A runaway slave, bound and gagged, eyes wild with terror. "Here is your test. Spill his blood upon the altar. Do so, and your place is secure. Refuse, and your bargain ends here." Ezekiel's heart thundered. The blade was pressed into his hand, heavy, cold. The prisoner moaned through the gag, falling to his knees. Catherine's words echoed in his skull, "Do not become them." Yet he had promised her freedom. Promised her survival. If he faltered now, all would be lost. Ezekiel raised the blade, but his mind was racing. Perhaps he could strike, kill Silas first, or cut the prisoner's bonds, or carve a path through fire and panic. He saw in a single flash the blood, the screams, the chaos. But Silas was watching, always watching, eyes glittering like a serpent's. Ezekiel hesitated, breath sharp. Then he lowered the blade. "I will not kill for you," he said, voice low but clear. "Not an innocent." A hiss of outrage circled the chamber. Crenshaw spat. Pelham half rose, fists clenching. But Silas raised a hand, halting them. "No," Silas said softly. "This is better." He resists, yet remains bound by the bargain. "Do you not see, brothers? This one believes himself righteous. That makes him useful. Righteous men make the best instruments, when bent to our work." The brethren muttered, some doubtful, others intrigued. Silas stepped close enough that Ezekiel could smell the wine and smoke on his breath. "You will not spill blood tonight. But you will, soon. And when you do, it will not be a stranger, but someone you choose. That is how we break the spirit. That is how we bind the soul." Ezekiel stared back, the blade trembling in his grip. He thought of Catherine, far to the north, and prayed she was alive. He thought of the ledger still hidden in this cursed house. He thought of revenge, and survival, and fire. Silas leaned closer, whispering for Ezekiel's ear alone. "You will kill for me, boy. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. But before this season ends, your hands will be as stained as mine. And when that day comes, there will be no turning back." The chanting thickened, low and guttural, echoing off the stone until it seemed the very cellar itself pulsed with the rhythm. The young woman writhed on the altar, her gag-muffling sobs, her wide eyes darting desperately toward Ezekiel. Silas lifted the ritual knife, long, thin, gleaming in the candlelight, and pressed it into Ezekiel's bound hands. "This is the moment," Silas said. "The line between weakness and strength, between meaningless suffering and purposeful power. Do not fail me." The circle of brethren leaned forward in their chairs, faces half hidden in hoods, every gaze fixed on him. Judge Pelham's lips curled in cruel expectation. Reverend Crenshaw's eyes glittered with hunger. Marcus Fanning's jaw twitched like a man who could barely contain his eagerness to see blood spilled. Ezekiel's pulse hammered. He could feel his family's names burning in his pocket, could feel Catherine's eyes and memory urging him, "Do not become them." But he also heard Silas's voice, cold and measured, "If you refuse, she dies." He stepped closer to the altar. The woman whimpered, thrashing against her ropes, but Ezekiel placed his hand gently on her shoulder. A tiny gesture, comfort, not cruelty. Silas noticed, eyes narrowing, but said nothing. Ezekiel lifted the knife. The chanting grew louder, swelling to a fever pitch. He could smell sweat, candle smoke, the metallic tang of fear. And then Ezekiel did something none of them expected. He cut the ropes binding the woman's wrists. One quick slice, clean through. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The chanting faltered. The woman's eyes widened with shock as her arms came free. Before anyone could react, Ezekiel pressed the blade against her gag and sliced downward, freeing her mouth. She drew in a ragged breath, choking on a cry that turned into a scream. Chaos erupted. Pelham surged to his feet, shouting. Crenshaw fumbled at his robe for a hidden pistol. Silas's face darkened with fury, but he did not move. He was waiting, watching, calculating. Ezekiel pivoted, shoving the freed woman toward the narrow service passage he had memorized weeks ago during his obedient observation. "Run," he barked. She stumbled but obeyed, darting into the shadows as shouts filled the cellar. Two brethren lunged at Ezekiel. He slashed wildly, not to kill but to create space. The knife nicked one man's arm, drawing blood, and the brethren howled like he had been gutted. "Stop him!" Marcus Fanning roared. "He'll ruin everything." But Ezekiel wasn't running. Not yet. He turned the blade toward the circle of robed men, breathing hard, his voice steady even as his chest heaved. "You wanted proof I would join you," he said, loud enough to cut through the chaos. "Here it is. I will never be like you. I will never spill innocent blood to please devils dressed as gentlemen." The chamber stilled for a heartbeat. Only the candles crackled. Then Silas stepped forward, raising his hand. "Enough." His voice cut like a whip, silencing the room. His expression was unreadable, fury masked by something colder, sharper. This proves more than any ritual could have. You see, brothers? Even in rebellion, he binds himself tighter to us. He thinks he resists, but he has already crossed the threshold. Crenshaw snarled. He defied the ritual. He freed the sacrifice. He should die here and now. Perhaps, Silas said softly. But consider, what is more powerful? To kill him and be rid of his defiance, or to let him live, knowing his every action from this night forward only deepens his entanglement with us? The brethren muttered, some angry, some thoughtful. Pelham spat on the floor. You play with fire, Silas. One day it will burn us all. Silas ignored him. He fixed his gaze on Ezekiel, who still stood armed but surrounded. You think you acted nobly. But the girl you freed? She will not escape this county. She will be found before sunrise. And when she is dragged back here, screaming, it will not be you who kills her, it will be all of us together. And her blood will be on your conscience twice over. That is how this works, Ezekiel. There is no third path. Only blood, or silence. The knife trembled in Ezekiel's grip, not from fear but from the weight of his choices. He could hear his heartbeat, feel the eyes of 13 devils pressing against him. And in the back of his mind, Catherine's words returned again, we need proof they cannot dismiss. Perhaps tonight he had not won. Perhaps tonight he had played directly into Silas's hand. But he had also created cracks in their certainty. A freed girl loose in the woods, however short-lived her escape, meant whispers. Witnesses. A chance, however slim, that truth might leak beyond Cypress Grove. Silas extended his hand, as though offering mercy. Come back to the circle, Ezekiel. Prove you are not a fool. Prove you are worthy of the gift I offered. Ezekiel did not move. He simply lowered the knife to his side and said nothing. Silas's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. So be it. The harvest has begun. The chanting resumed, lower, more sinister, vibrating through Ezekiel's bones. He stood in the center of the circle, blade dripping with the blood of rope fibers, and realized the trap had sprung fully shut. He was no longer outside their circle, no longer a slave observing monsters. He was inside. And they would never let him go. But the truth was different. Catherine Rutledge did not die in the fire. Nor did Ezekiel Gaines. Their names vanished into rumor, swallowed by smoke and secrecy, and in time they became whispers, shadows in the stories told among the enslaved at night when the masters were asleep. People spoke of a fire at Cypress Grove that consumed not only the house but the men who had gathered there, men who had done unspeakable things. People spoke of Catherine, the daughter who remembered, who defied her father and lived. People spoke of Ezekiel, who took vengeance and gave others a chance at freedom. No one dared speak too loudly, for fear that other brethren chapters in Savannah, in Charleston, in Mobile might hear and come searching. But the story spread anyway. A secret victory passed from mouth to mouth, field to field, plantation to plantation. It gave hope where hope had been beaten down for centuries. Ezekiel traveled west, just as he had promised. He moved under false names, leaving no trail but the help he gave. He became a shadow in the swamps and forests, guiding small groups northward through tangled rivers, through marshes where dogs could not track. He carved paths no maps recorded, built safe places in abandoned cabins and hidden hollows. People began to call him the Lantern, for the way he would appear in the darkest night holding a small flame that meant deliverance. His family's names, the paper he carried always against his heart, became his compass. Every time he wanted to rest, every time he thought of surrendering to despair, he unfolded that paper and remembered why he fought. Catherine took a different path. She reached Charleston under disguise, then Philadelphia, then further still. With the stolen money she carried, she built a new life, but not one of comfort. She disguised herself as a widow of modest means and used her position to connect with abolitionists, printers, and preachers. She could not tell them the full truth, too dangerous, too soon, but she began to write. At night, by candlelight, she recorded everything she had seen in Cypress Grove, the rituals, the ledger, the killings, her father's lies, the night of fire and blood. She did not write it as a confession. She wrote it as a record for the future. And when her journals were finished, she sealed them in tin boxes lined with wax, hiding them in places she hoped would endure, beneath church floors, inside walls, under stones that no one would lift for 100 years. History recorded nothing of this. Official ledgers said only that 13 honorable men perished in a tragic fire, that their families grieved, that plantations changed hands. Silas Ruttled's fortune was divided among distant relatives who carried on his work in quieter ways. The brethren did not die. Not all of them. In Charleston, in Savannah, in Richmond, they gathered again. Cypress Grove was erased from their records, an embarrassment, a cautionary tale. But their power lived on, quieter, hidden. Yet so did Catherine's record. So did Ezekiel's legend. Years later, people escaping north told stories of a tall, scarred man with eyes like fire who guided them through swamps, who never spoke his true name, who asked only that they carry the memory of the ones lost. They spoke of a man who once walked straight into the den of devils and came out alive, carrying vengeance like a torch. Some said he died fighting slave catchers. Others swore they saw him in Canada, older but still carrying that folded paper. No one knew for certain. And in Philadelphia, a small circle of abolitionists whispered of a woman who seemed to know too much, whose writings described horrors no one outside the South should have known. She never published while alive, but she taught others to see the rot beneath the wealth, the blood beneath the sugar and cotton. She planted seeds of outrage in the hearts of men and women who would later march, write, and fight for abolition. Decades passed. The war came. The South burned. Plantations fell. When Union troops marched through Culleton County, they found nothing left of Cypress Grove but stone foundations buried under vines. The land had swallowed the ruin whole, as if the earth itself sought to erase the memory of what had been done there. But memory does not die so easily. In attics and hidden chests, in boxes buried beneath churches, Catherine's words waited. In the songs sung in the fields, Ezekiel's defiance lived on. In the quiet prayers of families naming their children after those who had been lost, both their legacies endured. The world forgot the names Rutledge and Gaines, at least in the history books. But among those who had once been silenced, the story never died. They told their children, and their children told theirs. A story of a fire that consumed 13 devils in a cellar, a story of a daughter who remembered, a man who avenged, and a night when enslaved people rose and proved that even the most powerful could bleed. And though the official record would forever call it an accident, in whispered truth it was known for what it truly was. The reckoning at Cypress Grove. But perhaps not everything was revealed. History has a way of burying what it fears, of rewriting what cannot be explained, of silencing voices that speak too loudly against the order of things. The ruins of Cypress Grove are gone, the earth reclaimed, the buildings erased, but the soil remembers. People who have walked the ground swear they've heard whispers in the wind, seen faint outlines of fire in the distance, smelled smoke where no fire burns. Some call it superstition. Others call it memory refusing to rest. The journal, Catherine's coded testament, remains the great enigma. If it was destroyed, why do fragments of her story still resurface in oral histories, in letters, in fragments tucked away in archives that were never meant to be opened? If it was stolen, who keeps it hidden? A relic of guilt too heavy to confront? Or a weapon, preserved by those who know its power is not yet spent? And what of Ezekiel? Did he die on some nameless road, cut down by bounty hunters and forgotten? Or did he live to become the lantern that fugitives whispered about on the long road north? No historian has ever been able to prove it either way, but sometimes stories last longer than flesh, and sometimes that is proof enough. The legend of Cypress Grove is more than just a tale of revenge. It is a reminder that history is not just what is written in official ledgers and courthouse records. History lives in the cracks, in the silences, in the things whispered in the dark when the powerful aren't listening. And when those whispers last long enough, they become louder than the voices of those who once tried to erase them. So I'll ask you again, do you believe Catherine's journal still exists, sealed away, waiting for the right hands to uncover it? Do you believe Ezekiel truly became the lantern of legend? Or is all of this nothing more than smoke, myth born from tragedy, a story twisted by time until the truth is no longer knowable? Some mysteries may never be solved, but maybe that's the point. Maybe their power lies not in answers, but in the questions they leave behind. If this story unsettled you, if it made you wonder what else might be hidden just beneath the surface of the history we're told, then you already understand why these tales matter. They remind us that cruelty never disappears quietly. That memory, once awakened, refuses to sleep again. That justice sometimes comes not in courts, but in fire. Thank you for watching Story Vault. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more dark histories and forgotten mysteries, and click the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Share this story with someone who still believes that secrets can stay buried. Because as Cypress Grove proves, secrets always burn their way to the light.